Welcome to the Arabesque Sewing Studio. Now today we're going to be making the sweetest pincushion you've ever seen. Now I know that's a bold claim, but when you see this I think you'll agree it's really cute. So this features a cathedral window front and centre of the project. And if you've always loved the look of a cathedral window but thought this was too fiddly for you, I'm going to share a really easy method for putting this together that involves just a few folded squares and only takes one cathedral window to make it. This lets the cathedral window be the focal point of the design and lets you feature your favourite fussy cut front and centre. So if you've been saving a bunch of these for a special project, let's try this one together because it's really quick and easy to make. So my favourite thing about this project is it's so fast. You can make this with me in just an hour, and once you know how to do it, you can make a bunch of these in an hour. You won't be able to stop at just one. This is the first project in a series of easy cathedral windows that I'll be sharing with you. Each of them gets a little bit more difficult as we go along, and you'll be able to see how versatile this design actually is. Now all the supplies that I'm using here today are linked in the description below, so if you'd like to sew along with me, grab a copy of your pattern and let's get started. So let's run through what you're going to need to get started on this. So I do recommend cutting out your fabric with a rotary cutter and a ruler just for accuracy, and just aiming for accuracy in every step of this project, because even though it is a very quick and easy project, being as accurate as you can is going to give you the best result. So you're going to need an iron for pressing, you're going to need 4 fabrics, you're going to need some fusible fleece or some batting. I also recommend a woven fusible interfacing as well, which I like to use on the back of all of my woven fabric whenever I'm going to be making something three-dimensional, something that's going to be taking a bit of stretching and pulling as we make it. So that just also gives it a better finish when you're done, a better structure, and just helps add that just a little bit of extra polish. So you can totally leave that out if you don't want to put it in. You're going to need a very large handful of polyfill, and I always like to grab more than I think I'm going to need so that I make sure I've got enough. I like to add a little bit of weight in the bottom of my pincushions. So I've got some rice here, and you can use something like crushed walnuts, something like that, just so that you've got a little bit of extra weight in your pincushion, and it just helps it make it a little bit easier to use. You're going to need a needle and thread for sewing up your opening, and I also like to have a stiletto on hand, which is really good when you're manipulating the contrast fabric that goes around the fussy cut. So if you don't have one of them, just a pair of small pointy scissors is also really useful for just getting in underneath the sewing machine, underneath the needle, so that you can get into those tricky spots. My other secret weapon I use all the time is glue. So I've got a fine line glue tip here, and I've got some basting glue, and all of this I'll be linking to in the description below. So just make sure that you click down there and you read, because I'll go into where you can get this and what I'm using. I'm also going to be adding a little tag feature into this project today. So I've forgotten to add it in here, but what I'm going to do is add just a little ribbon that's going to go sticking out of the seam here, and this is just a little extra feature that you can add just for something cute. So if you've got any, you can use lace, you can use any ribbon that you might have that's got some little pictures on it, and I'll show you how to put this into the seam so that you can have a really cute little extra bit sewn into your pincushion. So just a note on how to choose fabrics here. So this is a really awesome project where you can just raid your scrap bin and use fabrics that you've been saving for something special, because this is the perfect time to use a special picture fabric that you really love. And you can see that this little mouse here is the perfect little character just to be featured in this window here. So what I like to do to make sure that my project is going to really pop and be able to be noticed is to make sure that the frame of my window, my contrast fabric here, is a good contrast between the fussy cut in the middle and also a good contrast between the fabric I've chosen for the front or the exterior. So just bear that in mind. You can see here that this particular project, while the fussy cut in itself is really cute, it's the same colour as the background fabric here, and it just doesn't really show off everything to its best ability here. So this one here, you can see everything is nicely contrasted, and you can see what's in the window, what the frame's made of, and the background fabric as well. So that's just something to think about when you're rummaging through finding fabric that you're going to put together. So for this project, I've got 4 fabrics here. So I'm going to be fussy cutting the little owl out of this fabric. This is the fabric I'm going to use for my contrast window frame. This is going to be my front or exterior of the pinny, and this is going to be my back fabric. So you can see that there's 4 fabrics here that all work really lovely together, but there's a good contrast between each of them so that it's not too busy, but there's also enough contrast so that you'll be able to see everything defined clearly. So included in the pattern is a very special fussy cut window guide, and this is just going to save you heaps of time because this shows you exactly how to frame the fabric that you're going to be using, because you are going to need to cut a hole in the center of your fabric if you want to have a particular design right in the middle here. So what you need to do is print this out from your pattern and check that your scale square is exactly 1 inch square. Then you're going to cut out the exterior square, then the shaded diamond in the middle, and then you're going to cut out each of these little rectangles, and you'll do that by folding this in half diagonally like that and cutting that out, and then refolding it and cutting each of them out like that. So today I'm going to be using this really gorgeous Tilda hibernation range, and I'm going to be cutting out one of these little owls. So what I want here is to get my bird exactly where I want it in the window. And you can see that this bird is a bit of a funny shape, and it doesn't naturally fit in this shape as much as some different pictures might. So the beauty of this little window is that you can just play around with it here until you are happy with how the picture is sitting in here, and this final window is the final amount of fabric that you're going to see when this is all stitched down. You're going to just grab a fabric safe pencil, and you're going to draw inside of each of these rectangles and also in each of the 4 points. So just put your pencil in each of these and in each of the 4 rectangles. Make sure that it's gone through and you can see it nice and clearly. And then when you lift it up, probably can't see this terribly well on camera, just grab your ruler and you're just going to connect those dots and those lines that you've drawn there. So now you're just going to go ahead and cut this out with either a pair of scissors or a rotary cutter, and you can be confident that not only is this the right size, but it's the exact orientation that you would like your little picture to be. I've got my project all cut out here. So I've got my fussy cut, I've got my 4 fronts, I've got my 4 contrast window squares, and I've got my back. And I've also got my interfacing and my fleece. And this is the little ribbon that I'm going to be using as my tag. So you're going to start by fusing the interfacing into the center of each of the exterior fabrics on the wrong side. You're going to grab your contrast squares, and you're going to fold them in half on the diagonal, wrong sides together. And this is where you need to start being quite accurate. So now we've got all 4 of these pressed, I'm just going to grab my glue and I'm just going to put a tiny dab between those points just to hold that together. So in between each of these triangles on the point, just a tiny dab of glue. Okay, so now you can grab your exterior fabric and lay these out into a 2x2 square or a 4 patch. And this is where, if you've got a directional fabric, you might want to think about how you've got this facing, or if you've got anything that you want to turn around, you can do that. So the next thing we're going to do is take one of these triangles and take the 2 raw edges of the triangle and place it on the 2 inner edges of one of these squares. So lay that out like this. So the 2 raw edges are going to go on the 2 inner edges of each of these squares. Two raw edges, 2 inner edges, and just to help hold everything in place, this is where I like to glue baste one more time. So I'm going to put just a tiny dot of glue on there and also on the point here. So just glue each of these back in place. So now we're ready to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to baste each of these sections along the 2 inner raw edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now we're going to take each of these 4 pieces and lay them back out the way we had them before. Then we're going to join these together. So the top pair, turn the right hand side on top of the left one, right sides together, and place a clip. And repeat this for the bottom pair. So right sides together. So you'll notice that the seam allowance here is starting to get quite thick. So just take it slowly when you go to the sewing machine. And then I'm going to open this out and press this seam open. And this is just going to help reduce the bulk that is in the center. You can turn it over. So what you're aiming for here is that each of these triangles are meeting as accurately as you can get them, and that you have 1/4 of an inch seam allowance left at the top. So now we're going to place these with these inner raw edges together and the triangles pointing outwards from each other. We're going to sew this middle center seam. So place the right hand one on top of the left one, right sides together. And we're going to match up this center seam as best as we can and clip that together. Now, this is one of those really fun things that if you don't get that seam meeting, no one's going to know, because you're going to cover it with the fussy cut in a minute. So just do your best to line that up. And what we are wanting more than anything is to try and get these triangles top and bottom to meet as accurately as possible. So that's the one that actually matters. The one in the center isn't so important. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew down this seam at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so now you can give this seam a press with the iron and have a look at it. And if your seam isn't meeting nicely in the middle there, that's okay. This is the one that's most important. So if this is dramatically off, then you might want to redo it.
but if it's just close enough, that will be absolutely fine. So now we're going to open out this seam through all of these layers. So this center here, where all of these meet, is really thick now. And we're going to be doing our best to open this out and just spread that out a little bit more. So then flip it over and give it a shot of heat from the other side. So now we're ready to add the fussy cut to the center of the window. So we're going to place that on here, and you're going to want the point of the square to line up with these seams at each of the points in the middle. So just center this over the top of it, and what you're wanting is it to be about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch smaller than the frame of the window here that we've got. This is the perfect size for making this work, and also making sure that the corners are going to be covered when we fold the window back. So I'm just going to glue this in place. I'm just going to put a couple dabs of glue on each of these points here. And now we're ready to create the window that makes a cathedral window look so iconic. So you're going to be folding back these edges that we've created with the triangles here. This is a bias edge, which means that it's going to taper and fold back very nicely with a nice curve. So you're going to want to, in the center of the side, fold this back by no more than about 2 to 3/8 of an inch. And you're going to taper this top edge so that it covers the raw edge on the corner of your fussy cut. So this will be getting wider as it's in the middle and then tapering out to the outside. And then as we come to the second side, this is actually going to fold back and overlap the top edge of the first side that you've just sewn down. So we're going to be stitching along one side up to the very top of the point. So make sure that your needle stops in that top point, and then fold back this side so that it overlaps and that all the raw edges on the fussy cut are covered. And then you're going to continue sewing back down to the next point, stopping exactly in that junction with your needle down, pivoting and sewing down the next side until you come back to where you started from. So let's take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to be stitching along this very inner edge. And you might want to increase your stitch length a little bit, just so that the top stitching looks a little bit nicer. Have a look at our work, and I am pretty happy with this. The stitching is pretty even, and if you don't get it as good as you would like it the first time, this is certainly something that you get better with practice. So now we're ready to fuse the fleece or the batting onto the back. So just make sure that you've got the sticky side onto the wrong side of the fabric, and I'm going to fuse this from the front. Generally you can't fuse fleece from the other side. Now, if you would like to add a cute little accent tag here, you can do this at this step. So I've got a little piece of ribbon here that I've cut. I'm just going to fold this wrong sides together and put a little dab of glue just to hold this shut. So just gluing it together here is a really good way to ensure that your tag is lined up exactly the top side with the bottom side. So now you're just going to pick which side you're going to put your tag on. And I think I'd like mine to be with the fussy cut facing up like this. I'm going to have it here on the bottom right hand side. So you're just going to measure up 1.5 inches from here. And then I'm going to take the tag and I'm going to place the raw edges lined up with the raw edges on the edge here. And I'm going to center that tag over that mark that I've made. And I'm just going to grab a clip and clip that there. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to base this at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now we're ready to sew the top and the bottom together. So you're just going to take your bottom and place it right sides together with your top. And we're going to clip our way around that. So now's the time to decide where you are going to leave the opening on your pincushion that you are going to turn this right side out through. So I do advise here that if you've got a tag on your project that you don't make your opening on the side that you've got this tag. And you also might not want your opening to be on the side where your fussy cut is facing upright from. So if you want to look at your project with the fussy cut and the image this way up, you might want to have your blind stitched edge that you've got where you turned it through. You might like to have that on the other side. Sometimes I wonder whether this is just me being a little bit too overthinking things, but I think it does bear thinking about that. If you don't want to have that super visible all the time, just think about where you would like that to end up. My little birdie here is facing this way up. I'm going to put my edge over on this side. So I'm just going to measure a 1 3/4 inch opening here, centered on the side. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch all the way around the raw edges here, and we're going to leave this section open here and make sure to backstitch your beginning and end really well. So now we're ready to box the corners on this little pincushion. So we're going to measure a box in each of the corners here, and we're going to make this 5/8 of an inch wide. So if you're not quite sure how to do that on your ruler, you're going to count 5 marks here up to here. This is the 5th mark, and then you're going to count 5 marks, 1 2 3 4 5 down like so. And then you're going to roll a box, and you're going to do that in each of these corners. Now just grab your scissors and you're going to cut out each of these corners. Now because we have cut these corners out here and we have stitches that are not reinforced on each of these ends, I do recommend you take this back to the sewing machine and stitch around all these edges again just to reinforce these ends here, because we are going to be tugging on these corners and you don't want this to all come undone and ruin your lovely work. So now you're going to slide your fingernail inside these 2 layers, and we're going to pull this corner apart and open this up so that we get like a little mouth shape here. I'm going to tug on these sides so that we end up with a sloping edge here, and these seams are coming together. There's 2 seam allowances here. I'm going to open these up So you're going to want to pull quite a fair way down from the top edge here. And this is going to ensure that you get a nice square corner rather than an angled one. And you're also going to do your very best to open this up and line up these two seams where they meet and get these matching as best as you can. So just keep looking in there and wiggling away until you can see them matching up. And I'm just going to clip these together. So repeat this for each of these corners. So tug on these edges here a bit further away from the top edge, open up your seam allowances, line them up and clip them together. So now we're ready to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch along this raw edge at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance and repeat that for each of the 4 corners. So now we're up to the super fun part where we get to birth our little project and see how it's actually going to look. So you're going to start turning that right side out through the opening that you've left, and just do your best not to tug on that opening too much because we don't want to rip the stitches. So just take it slowly. So just push your fingers into each of these corners here and just poke them out. There we go, this is looking really, really cute. So if you've got your seam allowance and everything lined up properly, then the point of the diamond on each of these corners should be meeting up very nicely at the top in the seam allowance here. And we still have this one left to sew up. So now we're ready to stuff this. So I'm going to put a little bit of rice in the bottom of mine. So I just like to put my funnel in there, and then I've got less than 1/2 cup here, and I won't put all of this in, but I will put in a reasonable amount of it. So just shake that down inside. And then I'm going to just grab my stuffing here. And what I'm aiming for is to keep the rice on the bottom. And I'm going to pad the top with a really good amount of polyfill so that it ends up being a really firm pincushion. And this is really up to you. If you prefer your pincushions a little bit softer, then don't put quite so much in. So just work your way in with a little piece at a time. Polyfill always looks better if you put in small amounts rather than try and just cram it all in one go, and it tends to clump and be quite lumpy. So I'm pretty happy with that. So now we're ready to sew this opening closed, and we're going to use ladder stitch for this. So you can either use a thread that is the same colour as your fabric that you're working on, or you can use a nice strong fine nylon thread that will blend in really well with your project as well. So I've got the strong nylon thread here. Okay, so I've got my needle threaded, and I want to tie a fairly large knot in the bottom here, because I'm going to be pulling quite hard on this thread. So if you'd like to see a video on how to tie this nice quick fast knot, you can see that linked in the description below. So if we just have a look at the project, you can see you've got a large wide opening here, and you have a stitch at either end here that has slightly pulled apart just from the tugging action of pulling the whole project through. So I want to pull these back together as I'm sewing. So I'm going to just pick one side, doesn't matter which side that you pick, and I'm going to take my needle inside and come up exactly where that stitch is coming out and pull that tight. Then I'm going to flip my work around. So this is going to determine which side you start on, because I'm actually going to stitch from left to right. So if you want to do this the opposite way, you'd start on the left hand side and then flip it back the other way. So then I'm going to take the needle and put that directly down into where this stitch is coming back in again. And I'm going to come up, and I'm only going to take about 1/8 of an inch of my fabric, and I'm going to bring my needle back out the other side. And then I'm going to come directly opposite that, so make sure my thread is pulling back directly perpendicular to that, and I'm going to come in to my fabric and take another bite of fabric that is about 1/8 of an inch and pull that. So I'm not pulling this tight at this stage, because I actually want to see that the ladder that I'm creating here, this is why this is called ladder stitch, is working nice and at right angles to each other. So take another bite of fabric on the opposite side, pull that fairly tight, and you're just going to do your best to stitch across, directly above, across, directly below, and do all of this at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And so this is the part that can get a bit trickier, is eyeballing this seam allowance and just doing your best to get this all level. Now we're nearly at the other end, and I want to come out exactly on that stitch that's pulling apart slightly at the other end of the opening. I want to come back down again into that side, and I'm going to come out in the base here. So I've just picked a spot on the base fabric. I'm going to pull that together. I don't want it to be puckered, but I do want it to be nice and closed with no stitches exposed there. So now I'm going to tie a knot here, and then I'm going to bury that knot back inside. Just give that knot a tug, get it to pop back inside. Then you can trim this off and just do a little bit of extra smoothing out and plumping, puffing, anything that might not look super even. And we're all finished. I hope you've enjoyed making this along with me, and I'd love to see your creations. So tag me with Mini Cathedral Penny so that I can see if you make one or lots of these.